Sonic, the heart of your system.
Alright guys, Dominic here for KitGuru, and today we are continuing our coverage of custom Navi graphics cards. This one in question is the PowerColor RX 5700 XT Red Devil. So this is actually the biggest custom card we have seen so far, with a triple fan cooler and what is also effectively a triple slot heatsink. On top of that, the Red Devil also has dual BIOS functionality and a factory overclocked core with a rated game clock of 905 MHz. Priced at $440 or £450 here in the UK, is this the custom Navi card to get? Well, we'll answer that question by starting with a look at the design, and the first thing you probably really will notice about the Red Devil is it's a much more colour neutral shroud design. So on previous Red Devil cards it's been very much black and red, lots of red accents everywhere, and with the Red Devil 5700 XT, apart from two little stickers on the front fans, there is simply no red accents anywhere, so it's very much colour neutral with a gunmetal grey and black shroud. Going hand in hand with that colour neutral design is the fact that this is actually PowerColor's first ever graphics card to sport RGB lighting, as we have two RGB zones on the front side of the card as well as one RGB zone on the backplate. For me, this is definitely a very good move, as it just simply lets you choose whatever colour you want to kind of accent with your own system, instead of forcing you down kind of like a fixed colour scheme which might not necessarily work with your own PC. The shroud itself is mostly made from plastic. All the kind of gunmetal grey areas you can see are made from plastic, but despite that it does actually feel relatively solid in the hand. There's no kind of flexing or creaking of the plastic, which is what we found with Sapphire's Pulse card, for instance. And there are actually also some metal sections. These black bits you can see on the front of the card, they're actually kind of metal plates which have basically been screwed on, and the screws have been left exposed, which personally I think looks really good, but obviously that's going to be kind of subjective. Overall, it's certainly not going to be as premium feeling as kind of like an all aluminium shroud as per the MSI Evoke OC, but for a card at this price it certainly doesn't feel cheap either. One thing we can say for sure about this card though is that it is very large, with the official dimensions coming in at 300 by 132 by 53 millimeters. So like we said at the beginning of the video, it is effectively a triple slot heatsink. On top of that, measuring 30 centimeters long, you definitely will be best off checking that this card can actually fit in your case. We can also get a look at those three fans on the front of the card, and each fan measures 90 millimeters across. The one thing I would say about these though is that I'm not really a fan, pun intended, of the kind of glossy plastic that they've been made out of. I think it kind of cheapens the overall look of the card. It just looks kind of a little bit tacky, but that's obviously subjective, and you know, I wouldn't be too critical of that. It's just I probably would have preferred kind of like a more matte black plastic to fit with the rest of the theme. One other thing to note about the fans though is that there is a fan stop mode, so the fans do completely stop spinning once the GPU temperature goes below 60 degrees. Moving over to the front side of the card now, we already mentioned the RGB logo, and there's also an LED strip just above that. But towards the front of the card, just by the I/O bracket, we can also get a look at the dual BIOS switch. By default, the card ships with the OC mode enabled, which is the one towards the front of the card, towards the I/O bracket, and that has a 220 watt power target. But if you flick that away, you can actually engage the silent BIOS, which has a 180 watt power target, and we will be testing both of those BIOS just in a little while, so stay tuned for those results. If we flip the card over now, we can also get a look at the metal backplate. Of course, it's all black to kind of keep in trend with this new color neutral design, and we can see that while it is a full length backplate, there is a cutout behind the GPU core, and interestingly, PowerColor has done this kind of mesh or grill effect towards the end of the card just above the heatsink, and that is simply to kind of increase overall heat dissipation with the fan kind of blowing air straight through and out the back of the card. We can also get a look at the power connectors now, and interestingly PowerColor has increased these, so you need two 8-pin power connectors instead of reference, which is one 8-pin and one 6-pin, but we can also see that video outputs are exactly the same as reference, with 3 display ports and then 1 HDMI. Opening up the card to look at the PCB, here we can actually see PowerColor is the first GPU manufacturer we have seen for a 5700 XT to kind of increase the overall power delivery for the GPU itself, as PowerColor has gone with a 10-phase solution, which is up from a 7-phase power delivery of the reference card. It is still a 2-phase power delivery for the memory though, and incidentally here our 8GB of GDDR6 memory does come from Micron. As for the heatsink itself, this is by far and away the largest we have seen for a custom Navi card. It's made of 2 separate aluminium fin stacks, and these are connected by 5 6mm heat pipes. These heat pipes draw heat away from kind of a single base plate, which is used to cool both the GPU die as well as the VRAM, while there is also a much smaller cold plate just for the MOSFETs off to the side. So that's been it for our look at the card and the cooler itself. We're now going to go in and detail the cooler performance. The first thing I will say here before we get the charts up is that we did test both the OC BIOS and the silent BIOS, so you will see 2 results for the Red Devil card, and just so everyone's clear, the O after the name obviously stands for the OC BIOS and the S stands for silent BIOS. If we start off with our temperature testing now, both BIOS do make improvements over the reference card, and if we start off with the OC BIOS, here we saw the GPU peak at 71 degrees, or 9 degrees cooler than the reference card. The silent BIOS does run a little warmer, I guess we would expect that as the fans are spinning a bit slower, and that peaked at 74 degrees, but that is still 6 degrees cooler than the reference card. The thermal results do look even more impressive though when we factor in noise levels, as simply put, either BIOS is just dead quiet. Starting with the OC BIOS, this produced just over 39 decibels of noise, which is still far and away like miles quieter than the reference card, and that was with the fans running at about 1460 RPM, which is about 41%. With the silent BIOS though, things just get ridiculous. It's actually, you know, the quietest card I've ever heard when running in the silent BIOS, as the fans would actually spin as slow as 950 RPM, so less than 1000 RPM, and that I think is barely 26 or 27% of the fan speed. In this mode, being completely honest, the card is for all intents and purposes, you know, completely inaudible. In fact, the only way I could actually hear the fan spinning was if I put my ear kind of like just 2 inches away from the card. So it is simply just very, very impressive stuff. And although you do kind of lose a little bit of performance, as we'll touch on later, if you want the absolute lowest noise levels possible, the silent BIOS is a fantastic addition. Power draw testing is also worth touching on, and as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, the OC BIOS has a 220 watt target and the silent BIOS has a 180 watt target, so a 40 watt difference. And that played out pretty much perfectly in our own testing, with the OC BIOS drawing, I think it was about 41 or 42 watts more than the silent BIOS. So in the OC BIOS that is more power than the reference card, but interestingly the silent BIOS actually draws less power than the reference card. The reason for that is that the silent BIOS does actually downclock itself versus the reference card, so it actually runs about 35 MHz slower than AMD's reference design. On the other hand, if you stick with the OC BIOS, this obviously is a fair bit faster, averaging 1936 MHz under load, which it puts it about 115 MHz faster than the reference card. We're going to move on now to our games testing, and it is worth saying for all these tests we did use the OC BIOS just because, you know, that's going to give you the kind of best case scenario for the Red Devil. And in this video we're going to be showing our 1440p charts, but if you do want to look at our 1080p and 4K results, you can find those over on kitguru.net. Putting our charts up now then, the games testing for the Red Devil is pretty much what we've come to expect when reviewing a custom Navi card, which means that the Red Devil is a little bit faster than the reference design, but there's really not much in it. In fact, over all of our games we saw the PowerColor Red Devil averaging just 3% faster than the reference card, which puts it basically neck and neck with the MSI Evoke OC. The Red Devil might be marginally faster here and there, but the differences are so small you're just not going to be able to notice them when playing the games. Still, 3% I guess is better than nothing. It just goes to show that by now we kind of know the Navi cards have been delivered pretty much on the limits of their overall performance, so we're not going to see, kind of big increases from a factory overclock. The extra frequency does help close the gap on 2070 Super, however, as the Red Devil is barely 1% slower than the Founders Edition 2070 Super. Although if we do kind of bring in a factory overclock model like MSI's Gaming X Trio, there the Red Devil is still 4% slower. Up against 2060 Super though, it is a clear win for the 5700 XT, as the Red Devil is 13% faster than Nvidia's 2060 Super Founders Edition. Even up against Palette's 2060 Super Jetstream model, which is a factory overclock card, the Red Devil is still 8% faster on average. We were able to push things even further via manual overclocking, with the GPU core maxing out at its limit of 2150 MHz. We couldn't quite get the absolute maximum memory overclock though, as at 950 MHz in Wattman we were getting instability, so we dialed that back to 925 MHz. Still, that overclock did see a decent boost to our average clock speed under load, with the card now averaging 2052 MHz, which is basically another 115 MHz over the default OC BIOS. In our games, this extra frequency did help, but it wasn't kind of a massive jump forward. In fact, across the games we tested with this overclock, we saw performance increase by an average of 4%. So it is definitely better than nothing, but it's not a massive leap forward. Countered against that though is when we compare the manually overclocked Red Devil to the reference card. The Red Devil is now 8% faster on average, so it does go to show that if you have a factory overclock card which you can then manually overclock even further, the extra frequency does add up. So then, wrapping up this review of PowerColor's RX 5700 XT Red Devil, without a doubt this is the best custom Navi card we have reviewed so far. It simply does everything really, really well, and the dual BIOS functionality is excellent. That's because not only is the OC BIOS itself very cool and very quiet, it also runs 115 MHz faster than the reference card. You can also switch over to the silent BIOS and just get, kind of ridiculously quiet noise levels. In fact, the Red Devil in the silent BIOS mode is definitely the quietest card I have ever heard, as the fans don't even spin past 1000 RPM. So while the card itself is an absolutely fantastic graphics card, the one downside I would say is that for those of us in the UK, pricing definitely isn't as attractive as it is for those in the US. That's because in the States you can pick up the card for $440, which is $40 more than the reference MSRP, but still $60 less than the 2070 Super. So for that price premium, I would definitely pay the extra over the reference card every day of the week. Here in the UK, however, there is no doubt pricing isn't quite as attractive, as the Red Devil will set you back £450. This is a £70 price increase over the reference MSRP, which works out as an 18% increase. So if you are in the States, you are getting a much better deal if you can get this for just $40 above the reference pricing. No matter how you look at it though, without a doubt in my mind, this is the best custom Navi card yet, and I really think it sets a new benchmark for what we can expect, from custom Navi flagships. We're expecting to see the Sapphire Nitro card soon. I'm also hoping to get a look at the Acer Strix model as well. So the question for those cards really does become, can they actually beat the PowerColor Red Devil? So guys, that pretty much wraps it up for my review of the PowerColor RX 5700 XT Red Devil. If you like this review, you can give us a thumbs up. Do leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. If you're in the UK, would you still pay the extra money for the Red Devil? Do let me know your thoughts. If you haven't subscribed already, please do feel free to do so. You can also hit that notification bell. If you like this t-shirt I've been wearing, you can check out our merch, which is linked in the description below. If you'd also like to help and support us, you can consider backing us on Patreon. And as an added perk, we also do exclusive giveaways every now and again for our Patreon backers. So you can also find a link for that in the description below. Until then though guys, I'm Dominic, and I'll see you in the next video.